Way down south in the land of froth and melody untiring, ain't that inspiring? Hurrah, hurrah, we'll join the Jubilee, and that's going some for the Yankees by gum. Red, white, and blue, I am for you, honest, you're a grand old flag. You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave.
Everyone, that's Artificial Nerd, and welcome back to the Vietnam War Deep Dive series. And today we'll be talking about the M1 helmet and its accessories. And specifically in the Vietnam War, because the M1 helmet, I think, went through the most interesting phase during the Vietnam War. So first things first, we're going to talk about a brief history of the M1 helmet. I will note I'm not the most knowledgeable of this. I only know certain details, and I'm not too confident on dates, so I'm just gonna kind of give a brief history. The M1 helmet was introduced in 1941 in World War II, and would be the standard issue helmet from 1941 to 1985, when it was replaced by the PSA GT helmet. And it would serve through World War II, Korea, the Vietnam War, and into the 80s, last being seen with the Marines. The M1 helmet had gone through a lot of things in World War II. The Army and the Marines both did some fun things with it. However, when we get, and the original actual World War II designs are a little different from this. This is a Vietnam era one. The World War II, as everyone knows, had a front seam on the rim. They had early ones had fixed bales in the 1944. They introduced, or 1943, I think they introduced a swivel bell, which this one has, but this has a Type 2 swivel bell. And those chin straps were tan, which I do have a World War II helmet, but I'm not going to show it because we're not talking about that. The helmet was also taller, or further, the back was further down, so it was a bit taller of a helmet. And soldiers would have the chin straps around the back due to that myth of if you're wearing it, it'll take your neck off. Liners were a little different at the time too. They originally had the string liners, but we'll get to that. So for this one, so when we get to Vietnam, the design changed a little bit. The helmet is a lot shorter in the back. It is now a rear seam. The paint is a little different. In 1966, they changed to a different paint. And we also see a different liner. This one is the early / mid-war liners. I think this was a 64, 65 dated. '65 dated. This is a Firestone liner. So yeah, this is an early to mid-war helmet liner. It has the same brown color of the War II ones. However, we get introduced to the new web setup, which I like a lot better. And then, of course, they would change. But, however, and you do also see some Korean War ones, which are World War II ones, both green as well. Early war. Anyways, rambling a little bit. So, the M1 helmet in Vietnam goes through it's kind of like that emo phase, where, all the little phases that happen during, late junior high, early high school. Yeah, that's what the M1 helmet went through during the Vietnam War. So, let's get into it. It's actually quite, it's interesting because it's quite comparable. Because at the conception of the M1 helmet, it was base. It was not the Marines put a helmet cover on it, but that was all. Then you also have the net, and you also introduced the helmet band in 1944. Then into the Korean War, kind of the same thing. Really, nothing much changes. It gets green, just a little bit of changes. It gets older. Then in Vietnam, it hits that it meets an interesting girl, goes to high school, and goes through some interesting phases. And then after that, it gets normal again until it's replaced. Anyways, so in Vietnam, the Marines first adopted it, but then the Army would adopt the Mitchell camouflage cover. This is an original one. Everything on this helmet is original except the sweatband and my liner. And it was a two-sided helmet cover. We have the leaf green side and the brown cloud side on the other. This would be the most common helmet cover. However, later in the war, you would see some ERDL helmet covers enter the stage. We also have a helmet band, which will come in handy a little bit later when we talk about that. These were quite commonly used by the Army. The Marines usually didn't have these. Some Army guys didn't. The Marines would improvise by using the inner tube of tires. I don't know what kind of tires, but they would turn those into helmet bands. Not the pretty common among Marines. However, some Marines just didn't do it. So yeah. Then we have green chin straps with a new design that came around after the Korean War. And we also have the Type 2 swivel bells. Now, here's where things get interesting. So at the beginning of the war, things kind of stayed basic. Most guys just had helmet, band, if they had it. And a lot of times you would see the helmet, the chin straps actually being used. However, a lot of guys also still had the rumors. So eventually you would see the chin straps being ditched, in a sense, not being worn. So the most common way is doing this, same as World War II, putting it on the back. However, you would also see some other common ways of doing chin straps, either through the helmet band, that was actually pretty common as well, or in some very rare chances, you would see them just being slung down, mostly by Marines, but some Army guys did it as well. And there was also some others where it either seems like guys just don't have helmet bands, don't have chin straps, or they have the chin straps tied around under the cover. Why, I don't know, but I've seen that, and it's quite odd. But if you were lucky enough to have a helmet band, well, it's good for you. As there was many things you could put in said helmet band. These were mostly used to hold foliage, that was the idea, same with these slits, which they were actually used for early in the war. However, as time went on and we get to around 1967, 1968, things start to get a little bit more personalized. Everything gets more personalized, especially the helmets. The first forms of personalization would be adding things to your helmet band for storage purposes. And there's many forms of accessories, but today I'm going to give some examples from that are in my squad. So first off, I got this today actually. This is a Type 2A insect repellent with some modern insect repellent in there. And that's all I have on mine. Mine's a very bare bones helmet, but I have that bug juice up there. Other things you would see would be bandages. That was not in my squad, but I have seen it where a guy had a bandage stuck in the chin strap in the back because he didn't have a helmet band. I see that in First ID. That was actually early war too, around 67, I believe. However, other things you could see would be, the M16 clip feeder or the strip clip assist to loading magazines. Don't know how accurate that is actually, but my second in command does that. You will also see matches or cigarettes. Those are quite common. You also will see lighters, pens, like political pens. You could also see grenade pins. That was not too uncommon. You could also see a can opener, like a P38 or a P51. Or you could also see gun oil, or in some cases, a church key. Now, there's many other things you could add to your helmet bands. Those are just some examples from my squad, so I thought it'd be nice to show off. And as you can see, a lot of times you don't have a whole heck of a lot in your helmet band, especially early on in the war. As things went on later, you would see a lot more. Some guys had a crap ton of stuff, but that is actually not very common. It's quite far being more of a Hollywood thing to see a bunch of stuff in the helmet band. That's actually very uncommon for the war. Later on, you do see a little bit of it, but overall, it's not that common. Graffiti then comes in next. I'll show some of the graffiti that some of our guys have. Graffiti was not very common early in the war. However, later in the war, it became more and more common. However, it was mostly and more commonly amongst draftees. Most enlisted men or volunteers didn't do graffiti. If they did, they would have very few of it, and the draftees would start with very few. But as the war would progress, you would see a lot more of graffiti. However, unlike Hollywood would like you to believe, helmet graffiti on the cover wasn't really that common. Later on, it would be. You would see it a lot later on in the war, 69 through the 70s. You're going to be seeing a good amount of graffiti. However, it is not that uncommon to actually just see guys with a bare cover, especially if they're volunteers. But some volunteers would join in, but those mostly draftees who would do the graffiti. And with guys who did a lot of graffiti, a lot of guys who did graffiti were mostly people who, well, one reason why it was draftees was because they didn't care to be there. They didn't want to be there, so they decided to rebel. Like I said, like a rebellious teenager. So that was pretty common to see with draftees, and especially with a lot, because they trying to stick it to the man in a way. It's stupid, but so you would see a lot of graffiti on them. However, of course, if there's a lot, that takes away the camouflage factor. So note that if you do want to add graffiti to your helmet, I would suggest adding graffiti, and then what you can do is if you wear it a lot or you put it outside, it'll fade the graffiti, and then it's not as visible, which is a good option too. If you want to add graffiti, also don't add graffiti to your original covers, please. Don't ruin history. But yeah, and that's really about it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
You're the emblem of